What if there were financial solutions being created by brave and brilliant women, a feminist economic model? A new organization of women is realizing that woman-centered model, lifting up women activists and their real-world solutions for building an economy of our own.
90 years ago, in a famous essay, Virginia Woolf advised a young woman writer that she needed two things, an income and a room of her own. After decades of a pay gap and big money's corruption, we need more than that today. We're creating an economy of our own.
An economy of our own is creating awareness of how rigged the current economy is and how many inspiring solutions are rising because of the work of brilliant women activists.
Women have been cheated and exploited by a mean economy for so long. But that's why we're in the best position to fix it together. And we're starting right now.
The people who have been most excluded by that system are the ones that have the deepest understanding of what has to be transformed. It is from that knowledge that it's very important for them to lead. That is leadership we absolutely have to have.
Screwnomics is my word for the widely applied economic theory, I guess, that women should always work for less, or even better, for free. Together, we can create a living economic ecology. But to do that, we're going to need to make economics far more sexy than it is today. There are feminist economic solutions, real-world fixes that are working in communities right now, communities like yours.
An economy of our own is all about creating the space to lift up solutions women are advancing. We're here to celebrate women's way of knowing about money, bring you the work they're doing to shake up the system, and compile critical resources for activists like you who want to bring these kinds of changes into your own communities. Put your head together with us. It's the way we create real solutions. Talking together about building an economy that works for all of us. We want an economy of our own. We want it now. And if you do too, join us today at aneconomyofourOwn.org.
Hello.
Oh, Emma. Hello, Emma. Well
How you doing?
So Elaine, you want to welcome people, and am I on? Can people see me now?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Yes,
we can see
let me welcome you, and let me welcome Elaine Ball, who is our technical host, who's going to run us through the features on this webinar and help us all understand what's going on and how to do it. Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Rickey. I apologize for any technical pauses. We're all learning here, but thank you. And that video we wanted to share with you gives a wonderful overview of an economy of our own. And Rickey's going to introduce our panelists, but first I wanted to give you just a brief overview of the Zoom webinar format that we're using this evening and some of the things that you can do with it. So if you click on the Participants tab at the bottom of your screen and on the chat, a panel will show up on the right-hand side of your screen where you'll be able to type a message that you can send to the panelists or to the rest of the participants. And you can select who you would like to send the message to by clicking on the little blue box that appears there at the bottom of your chat box. You can select your message to go to all the panelists or to the panelists and attendees so that everyone participating in tonight's webinar can see what you write. And we would love for you to share right now as a practice to share where you're joining us from tonight. Go ahead and tell us where you're from, region of the country, of the world, greet your neighbors. let us know.
Okay, I'm Emma Chappell, and I'm calling from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Oh, wonderful. And some of you can also speak. I apologize. Most of us are on mute,
Oh,
except for our
okay.
panelists, but you can use the chat box to make sure that everybody can see your comments. But if you're calling in from the phone, you won't be able to chat in the chat box. So you can also let us know over the phone if you're calling in. So thank you.
So we should be on mute, Elaine?
Yes, if you can mute your sound, that will enable everybody to not have background noise or an echo when the panelists are speaking. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, we've got South Bend, Indiana, and Los Angeles, and the Independent Republic of Vermont, Southern Oregon. We got Sonoma, California, and Philadelphia, and the Green Mountains, and Madison, and some folks from Oakland, Lakeland. Wow, that's great to know. Great to know. And then we had a poll we wanted to ask people, because I know that there's something on everybody's mind. Have you got that, Elaine?
Yes. So following the November election, this is a multiple choice poll, of course.
You can choose as many as you want.
I believe you can choose as many as you want.
So we panelists can fill this out too?
Yes.
All right.
I think everybody can see sort of in live time how other people are voting.
Oh, there's just a check mark for fill in the blank.
So maybe if you have a fill in the blank, you can let us know in the chat what your answer is. What are you going to be doing following the November election?
Ah. Oh, here's one. Yeah. I hope I get to eat more food cooked by others after this pandemic. That's a good one. Yes.
It has been kind of difficult to not be able to eat out as much.
Someone is going to hold her breath.
So I certainly want to wrap up the tech portion of my introduction and let Rickey get on to introducing our panelists, but I wanted to let everybody know that in the chat box, you can also send a direct message to me if you have any questions about how to work some Zoom tidbit, some question you have, how to change your view from speaker to gallery view so you can see all of the panelists together, or if you have any questions about how to send a message or how to ask a question in the Q&A, just let me know. My name is Elaine, and thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Indeed. Let me just echo that. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. It's not easy these days, but we're here for a woman-to-woman conversation about basic economic building blocks, cooperative, but not the usual kind, a slightly changed building blocks. Shared economies that involve businesses and banks. Those are things we're familiar with. Corporations and their finances, we're familiar with that, but not the usual kind. And I want to start with two items that you saw earlier, and you got them with your registration. Can we just go through that shortly, Elaine? The first slide, the assumptions. We want to just make sure we're all on the opening page here. No? Well, let me just go through them. We want our assumptions are they probably didn't look this beautiful. They were just on white paper, but here they are. Money talks in the male voice. All the rules and the inventions of banks and corporations, for instance, weren't invented by women. And often females have been omitted from economic thinking. Slavery has been banned for 156 years now, but systemic racial exploitation remains very much in place. Women have always worked, but only the last 50 years have we seen a majority of young mothers and most women entering the modern job market, which job market kind of reminds me a little bit of slavery, but let's not go there now. Women and people of color are now business owners and financial managers, but caring still remains discounted. And that word economics is from the Greek oikonomia. It literally means household management. So we know women have know-how to change how this economy works. And we can look around us at the growing inequality and environmental ruin that tells us we can't afford more alpha male only business as usual. Then let's go on to the intents that we have for tonight. Here we go. We want to inspire your economic competence and your life waging value. And we're going to go by, we're going to honor all stages in women's ways of knowing that Gilligan and Belinkie and all those folks talked about. We begin, you can be in any one of these stages of learning, and often you have to repeat them depending on what you're studying. But we often start in silence. You might feel kind of dumb and disconnected and afraid to say anything. You might be receiving knowledge, all right, listening to the voices of others in authority. That's a way to start. Then you can move on to subjective knowledge. You begin to know you've got your own inner voice and your own opinions, and you're protective of those. And then you're going to move on to procedural knowledge and begin to be curious not only about what other people think, but how their perspectives were formed. You're going to take their context into consideration, and you're going to find some truths more reliable and logical than others. And then finally, you'll discover that all knowledge is really built and not born, and you're going to trust your ability to pursue knowledge by listening to diverse voices and all kinds of contexts and collaborating with others. You can hold and remodel your ideas with passion and pleasure. Passion and pleasure, that's what we intend to do tonight, have that kind of a conversation. So now let's meet our wonderful guest tonight. Oh, Elaine, I think, yeah, there we go. It's kind of like a roller on a piano or something, isn't it? I didn't know it would work like that. I've asked our four panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a bit of their journey. They've taken the road less taken, and I know they all have a story, and we're really interested in how they became interested in these alternative kinds of business models and finance models. And I think maybe we should start with talking about corporations, because that came first, I think. And Jamila, I wonder if you'd introduce yourself. You're from Philadelphia, and you're the director of the Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance. Tell us how you got there and what makes you happy working there.
Awesome. Thank you, Rickey. I suppose I'm driven to do this work at PACA, the Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance. And our mission is, the mission is to improve the lives of people in the Philadelphia region by supporting democratically organized businesses, promoting the principles of the international cooperative movement, and growing the cooperative economy. There was a seed early on planted for me, I think, to be engaged in this work. I grew up middle class in a majority Black, poor, and working class neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York. And my church home was one that embraced liberation theology and exercised it through cooperative economic activities related, as I remember them, to real estate. So for example, the church bought up various properties surrounding the church and supported Black entrepreneurship. and led affordable housing efforts through home ownership projects. And I was only in elementary school when these things were happening, but I remember keenly seeing significant life transitions happen for my friends that were moving from public housing projects to single family homes through this understanding that pooling resources can lift us all up. And my work in the co-op sector began in 2012 when I was working at Mariposa Food Co-op and was part of its staff collective. And while working there, I was introduced to the co-op business model and democratic workplaces. I also began volunteering at PACA, really to help me understand co-ops so that I could better do my job at Mariposa, which was to recruit members. I was the membership coordinator, and I stayed involved in my work in PACA. I found that cooperative economics and its expression through the co-op business model gave me access to an opportunity to support folks in expressing their own self and community determination efforts. Co-ops, cooperatives are people-centered enterprises owned and controlled and run by and for their members to realize their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations. They bring people together in a democratic and equal way. And I preferred working towards that kind of uplift than what I'd been doing in my career up until that point in nonprofit programming and administration before working at Mariposa. And my leadership grew in PACA as I moved from steering committee volunteer to elected board member to executive director, which is the role I took over in 2017. And PACA has become the leading organization in the Philadelphia region, supporting existing and startup cooperatives with technical assistance, leadership development, policy and advocacy, as well as cooperative education and training for a variety of stakeholders, including community residents, elected officials, and economic and community development leaders. And our work takes place primarily in Philadelphia, which is the poorest large city in the United States, and is also a majority Black and brown city with a growing immigrant and refugee population. In order to build an equitable and cooperative economy, PACA acknowledges and takes action to repair the impact of hundreds of years of racial and economic injustice in this country. So we prioritize providing free and low-cost support to working class and poor Black, brown, and immigrant communities. And we provide business development resources and assistance towards accessing capital in order to support the creation of cooperative businesses that are owned and democratically controlled by the very communities from which wealth has been stolen historically and even now. An ongoing challenge, however, to scaling and advancing the creation of cooperatives, particularly among the communities that PACA centers its work for, is the under-availability of non-extractive capital. So for many business loans, especially for startup businesses, lenders request personal guarantees or credit scores from borrowers. And these aren't, in Philadelphia, the majority of people turning to the cooperative economy are folks who have been systematically marginalized and therefore don't hold the generational wealth of credit scores typical banks require. And then we need a fairer, better, more equitable economy and solutions to capitalizing small businesses. And so I'm really excited to be here with you all tonight to talk about the intersections and specifics about co-ops and public banks. So.
Thank you, thank you. Jamila, I'm reminded so much of what you say that connects with what's happening in Oakland. And Jhumpa Bhattacharya, you're part of a unique organization in Oakland that's doing, it's the Insight Center for Community Economic Development, and you must be looking at some of the same issues that Jamila was just talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So first of all, thank you all for being here. It's only 5:30 for me, but I know for a lot of folks it's 8:30 or somewhere between 5:30 and 8:30, which I know can be late. So thank you for having me, and thanks for hanging with us as we talk about this today. I'm excited. My name is Jhumpa Bhattacharya. I'm the Vice President of Programs and Strategies at the Insight Center. And the Insight Center is a national racial and economic justice organization with the mission to ensure that everyone, regardless of their race, gender, immigration status, or zip code, become and remain economically secure. right? So we really do a lot of work, particularly around racial and gender wealth inequality. About a decade ago, we were one of the pioneer organizations that really lifted up and provided a lot of research and advocacy around what is this racial and gender wealth gap, right? And really brought it to the public discourse, where now most people can kind of know, right? It's even been a part of a lot of the presidential debates, like what is the racial wealth gap? What is a gender wealth gap? And our work really centers around looking at wealth as the economic North Star, because, you know, there's income. Income is a part of your wealth, and we think wealth is a North Star because wealth, while we're living in a capitalist society, is what affords you power, right? It's what affords you dignity. It's what allows choice. So it's more than just the money, and wealth is really the sum of everything that you own, plus your inheritance, minus everything that you owe, your debts, right? Wealth is what you draw on in times of an emergency, say a global pandemic, or in the catastrophic fires that I've been sadly privy to by living in Northern California. Wealth helps you in a medical emergency. Wealth is what your nest egg, right? It's there for families to pull on in times of emergency. And right now in America, because of the racist, sexist, and xenophobic rules and narratives that have set up all of our economic and social policies, we are living in a society where the average white family has 10 times more wealth than the average black family, and 7 times more wealth than the average Latinx family. There's a lot of, I don't like to talk about Asian data because I believe Asian data needs to be disaggregated, and the data that's out there kind of lumps all us Asian peoples together. And so I just want to make a note of that it's not that I'm ignoring Asian folks. I just don't think we have really good data to talk about that specific population. I really come to this work because we at the Insight Center truly believe, like I said, that the intersections of both the rules, the practices, and the narratives, right? So when I'm talking about narratives, I'm talking about the mental frames, right? Or the cultural understandings we all operate under because we live and maybe we're born and brought up in America, right? So an example of kind of a narrative, a meta-narrative is like this whole, you can pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, right? Or the American pioneer, right? These are kinds of ways in which we think about the world. So narratives are like things that facts bump off of, right? It's just kind of how we understand how society is built. So we have these really awful narratives that are steeped in anti-Blackness, that are steeped in patriarchy, and that are steeped in xenophobia. Oh my goodness, I only have a minute. Okay, that tell us that it's people's fault that they're poor, that it's about individual decisions that you've made that have put you in the life circumstance that you've seen. And we know that that's not true. It's actually, it then ignores all the structural implications that are out there that have actually put people where they are, that have led to this space where white folks have 10 times more wealth than Black people. So I really come to this not as an expert on public banking or cooperatives, but as an expert in really understanding that the way our economy is set up right now simply was not built to uplift women, in particularly Black women. So I'm bringing an intersectional lens into this discussion, and that we need to come up with alternative solutions, and not even just, I mean, I love this frame of an economy of our own, but I'd also like to push us further to say that the economy writ large, which we have control over, right? The economy is made from rules that we put out there. It's not its own natural thing, right? We control the economy. We are the economy. Those rules and narratives need to change so that they actually uplift Black women, which would then help all of us.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Thank you. That sort of puts this in this is a natural bridge to Emma Chappell in Philadelphia again here, who was a real pioneer as a woman in banking in Philadelphia, a Black woman in Philadelphia in banking, doing remarkable things. And yet here you are now on the board of the Public Banking Institute. So Emma, could you tell us something about your journey? How'd you get here? Oh, we need to unmute your microphone, Emma.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. I said it's a long story. Suffice it to say, right now I'm retired. I have my own company, a consulting firm, Altroy International, and I provide financial consulting, okay? But my background started with, sort of like Jamila, I started in the church. And of course, I'm much older than her. And I started in the church when we had a pastor by the name of Reverend Leon Sullivan, who was very internationally known figure in Philadelphia. And he was my pastor as well as a relative of mine. And every Sunday I would go to church and he would talk about the kind of racism and sexism that was going on in Philadelphia and around the country. And he said that one of the things we need to do is to figure out how we could work with the banks in the area. And what was nice was, it wasn't good, but my mother died when I was 14 years old. And he and his wife, who were relatives, took control of raising me up with my father. And so every Sunday I was in church. And one day, as I was graduating high school, he asked me, what was I going to do with my life? And I said, I don't know. He said, well, what can you do? I said, I can do everything. And he gave me this math test. And he said, you know what? I know exactly what you're going to do. You're going to be the first Negro. At the time, we were called Negroes. He said, you're going to be the first Negro in banking in Philadelphia. And he said, I want you to take this job. And they offered me this job, sort of starting like an intern, so to speak. And I got to tell you, I worked my way all the way up in that bank, and I stayed there 30 years. They paid for my undergraduate and graduate work. And it was a wonderful relationship. It was kind of like they adopted me as their kid. And so having been there, I worked in every department in the bank. And my last department was a loan department. And in that loan department, I learned that the power was I used to do all the analytical work for the lenders because naturally none of the lenders were Black. And so they let me do the analytical work. And math was my thing. That was my stronghold. That was my strength. And so I would analyze all the loans and present them in committee and tell them which loans they should make. And then they would go out and be the big mahaf and tell the companies in the area they would make the loan or they wouldn't make the loan, but it was based on my evaluation at the time. And so I started noticing the power that you had if you could lend money to businesses to grow the business itself. And here in Philadelphia at the time, African-American businesses were not growing. Neither were women-owned businesses growing because they could not get loans at banks. And so I went to, Stonehill Graduate School of Banking was my graduate work. And while I was there, we were required to run a bank as a model on the computer. And each of us in the class had to do a different bank or work with a team to do a bank. And I ran the most successful bank on the computer, and yet I was not exactly computer smart. But with the team that I headed up, we ran the best bank. And so it clicked in my mind, if in the Black community, we cannot get loans, our houses in our neighborhoods are redlined, and the businesses can't borrow, what can I do to help? Why can't I do something to help out? So while I'm thinking all that, way back while in the early days of my banking, I had been very involved in the civil rights movement also because of Reverend Sullivan. And so I was active in the NAACP and something called Rainbow Push in Philadelphia and around the country, Reverend Jesse Jackson. And so I went off, at one point, Reverend Jackson came into Philadelphia and asked me to be his national treasurer when he ran for president of the United States. And when I traveled around the country with him as his national treasurer, and at the time we raised millions of dollars, in every city where there was a successful African-American community, it was because they had a minority-owned bank. And so I said, I know what I'm going to do when I go home. I'm going to try to put together a bank. But I no sooner got back to Philly and went back to working for my old bank, which was Continental Bank at the time. And they brought me right back in. I started working there, and a group of people, about 6 or 7 men, came to see me, and they told me that they had done a study and that there was a need for an African-American owned bank in Philadelphia. And the study also indicated if anybody could do it, I was the right person to do it. So they asked me, so that was really something that made me very proud. So I said, well, I would take on the challenge as long as I didn't get fired right away, because that was my income at the time, because I had been active in the civil rights movement, which didn't pay a whole lot of money. So anyway, they came to see me, and I'll never forget Andrew Young, who was the ambassador at the time. I told him the story that 9 out of 10 people said that it should be Emma Chappell to run the bank. He said, only reason why it wasn't 10 out of 10 is because the other person wanted to do it themselves. But any event, I started that was in 1987. And I started working with the guys who came and asked me, and they said, you don't have to worry about raising the money. We can raise the money. You just go ahead and put together the business plan to start a bank. And so I went back to my home and started putting together a plan. Now, remember, I had worked in every department in the bank, so I knew very well what the different departments did. So I started writing my business plan, and they were raising the money. And lo and behold, the stock market crashed in 1987, October 19th, I'll never forget it. And those guys pulled right out from under me. Now, that was a disaster, because I had been around talking to people in churches and various communities and telling them we were going to have our own bank, and teaching them on the importance of having your own bank and how a bank accumulates capital and redistributes that capital in the community. And so, and I had this great reputation, and everybody was backing me and what have you. I had to go back and tell them that we didn't have the money, that we couldn't start the bank. Well, as God would have it, the people, the community rose up and started recommending that I just raise the capital myself. And so that's what I did. I started selling stock at $10 a share in blocks of 50 for $500. Now, I got this concept from having worked with Jesse Jackson when he ran for president, and we traveled around the country raising money. In any event, we raised the money. I raised $6 million to get the bank open. Now, initially, only $3 million was required. And it just happened. I got to the $3 million in 1989. And it's still a messed up recession going on. Anyway, I did get the $3 million, and I got the business plan ready. And I drove up to Harrisburg, which is the capital of Pennsylvania, and just all happy and everybody. And I did it on the Independence Day weekend, and told the people on the radio, I'm going up and get our charter. I got up there, and it was a woman running who was the Secretary of State. I'll never forget it. And she told me when I got there, she had such a nasty attitude. She said, you can't get a charter. You need $5 million. Now, mind you, the public had put together this money, had chicken dinners and all kinds of things. I went to 3 and 4 churches a Sunday, raised the money. And now I had to come back on and tell the people we could not have the bank. Well, that was, I think I cried all the way back from Harrisburg. It was one that I didn't kill myself on the highway. I came all the way back. I came all the way back to Philadelphia. And I remember this guy, I just talked to him recently. And I had one employee, up to one person who volunteered employees. And she said, Miss Emma, we're going to do this bank because you've made this commitment. And I came back and started telling the public about the issue and what happened to me. And then before you know it, I had $5-6 million. And so I drove back up to the Capitol and said, now here's $6 million and here's my plan. Give me my charter. Wow. And so the rest was history. We opened the bank, and in short order, I had $150 million in assets. And let me tell you, the stock was sold all around the country because people believed in the concept, and outside the country, from Jamaica and places like that. So I had a lot of support, and it was multicultural. It was definitely diverse. At the time, I was running an organization called the Forum of Executive Women here in Philadelphia, which was mostly Caucasian women, and they got behind me and supported me 100%. My old bank gave me $250,000, said, go ahead and get the bank started. We have faith in you. So I had a lot of support, and it took that kind of support of people who believed in the concept and supported me, and knowing that I was a person that would do all I could to make it happen. And that's what happened.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks so much. What a story. What a story. Now Susan Harman is here from Oakland, same same city that Jhumpa is from.
Yeah.
But you're not even a professional banker, Susan, and you have worked very, very hard there in Oakland to pass legislation to create a new public bank in California, a very big deal. What on earth took you to this task? What drives you? What's your story?
Well, Emma's a hard act to follow.
Yes.
Not great scheduling on my part. I do want to say that I was born in Philadelphia, so I feel a connection to both Emma and Jamila.
Wonderful.
Yes, Philadelphia was my first home. I was a teacher and a principal and a college professor all my life, and phobic about money. There were several years when I just never got around to paying my taxes because it just was like facing, I don't know, doom. I hate it every year. And it couldn't be more ironic that I'm engaged in this process of starting public banks right now. What happened was I went to a conference and wound up sitting next to Ellen Brown at dinner. Ellen is really the theorist, the great theorist of public banking. And she explained to me how banks create money out of thin air. And it was the most outrageous and radical thing I'd ever heard in a life of radical pursuits. And I decided that's what I was going to work on, that there was absolutely, I couldn't think of any reason why Wall Street banks would have that ability and the rest of us wouldn't. So that was the beginning for me of public banking. I should also say that I very recently watched Gloria Steinem's autobiography, a new movie, and I knew Gloria back in the olden days. So my feminism it's not something I talk about or do much about these days, but it's a deep-rooted part of me and what I do and what I believe. So this seminar tonight is really a coming together of some of my most serious and committed beliefs. So after I met Ellen, I started working with the Public Banking Institute, which Emma is on the board of, and then got very active here in California locally. We got commitments from Oakland and Berkeley next door and our county and Richmond up the road a little bit, much poorer community, to do a feasibility study. We did that. That was a couple of years ago. And then we kind of ground to a halt trying to raise the money to do the business plan, which is what California requires to do exactly what Emma described doing. When she took the business plan up to Harrisburg, we need to take our business plan to Sacramento and get approval. And we are on the verge of raising enough money, not quite as painfully as Emma did. We think we will get $1 million loan in the next few weeks, which will pay for the business plan and the startup costs of the bank, and then we'll be up and running. And in the meantime, while working on our local bank here in the East Bay, the divestment movement started, which brought in environmentalists and indigenous folks. And the reason that they got engaged in public banking is because many divestment movements all over the country went to their local city council or county board of supervisors and asked them to divest, to take out their deposits from the Wall Street banks, which are deeply invested in all kinds of extractive fossil fuel, private prisons, terrible things that none of us believe in. And although those resolutions passed, then the city treasurer came back and said, we have none of the community banks are big enough to take our account, and credit unions aren't allowed to. So we have no choice. We have to bank with, we can move to a different Wall Street bank, but we're stuck with a Wall Street bank. And that was just outrageous to the whole divestment movement. And the solution to that is starting our own public banks. I should say that one of the questions that we got before this event tonight was whether, what the difference is between a bunch of local, just community activists starting a bank. And that would really be much more like a credit union. A public bank uses the public funds, our taxes, the fees that we pay, parking meter fees, things like that, fish and game licenses, all the money that we pay our cities and our counties and our states, that money will get deposited in these public banks and then invested in turn in local economies with the direction of the local communities. So this is really the democratization of money. That's our goal, and that is what we will do in the very near future.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's very exciting. Well, you can hear how diverse these tales are, the different journeys that have brought you here. But there also seems to be a common denominator, and that is your common interest in widening prosperity for your whole community, right? And I wonder, we got some questions from people who registered that seem to be focused in two general areas. The first one is, you know, what is it exactly about these two models for banking and for business that makes it different? And Susan, you said a word, democracy, that Jamila used early on as she described cooperative businesses. So maybe that's one common word. But I wonder what else you might see that is common to both of these models. People who sent in questions earlier wanted to know what's the difference, what is it exactly, and then also how. But I thought maybe we should start with what is the difference? What do you see that's different? And Jhumpa, maybe you can talk about what you see as really needed that's different.
Well, I think we need economic structures and systems that actually uplift women, right? I mean, and if we're looking at, if we follow Bell Hook's theory of bringing those who are most marginalized to the center as kind of our rallying cry, right? That is Black women, right? So I think we need to create structures, whether it's public banking or cooperatives, and other ones, right? Until we can fix this economy, we need to have alternative structures that actually work to uplift Black women. And right now, we know that they don't. The structure that we live in right now does not. It simply does not, by design. So many people say that the economy isn't working, and I would say that the economy is absolutely working, right? Because it's working to keep control over Black women's bodies, Black women's thoughts, and that then impacts all women, right? So that's what's really intriguing to me about a different type of system that we can design that actually centers Black women, centers Blackness, and acknowledges Black genius, acknowledges Black joy, right? Acknowledges Black ingenuity. Because as so many of our, some of my fellow participants have already talked about, right? Like, we know that the traditional financial system, so traditional banks in particular, right, are continuously finding ways to extract wealth from people of color and women, right? So you can have, and you know, they'll be.
When you say that, what do you mean by extracting? How do they?
Yeah, that's a great question. Get me out of my wonkiness. If I use a wonky term, please tell me to. That's great. I love it. So what that means is you're physically taking money away from people, right? That's not allowing them to be economically secure. That's making them have a choice between, do I pay this bill, or do I keep a roof over my head, or do I feed my child, right? Which are not choices that people need to make. And again, you're taking money away from people to prevent them from building wealth, right? And wealth, again, is what we need in times of emergency. Wealth is intergenerational. Wealth is what we pass down to our brethren, right? So wealth begets wealth. You need capital in order to start a business, right? Which is why you need access to banks. You need capital to buy a home, right? Another way in which people build wealth in America. So it's really intriguing to me to have alternative systems, again, and design them and implement them in a way that actually centers Black women, because that is the polar opposite of what we have right now.
Jamila, how many women are involved in Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance? Are there a lot of women looking at that form of business?
Well, I can say that our staff is all female identified, and our board makeup is majority women identified as well. We have worked really hard over the last, I'd say 3 to 4 years to really transition from being an organization that was established in kind of like, I guess, like a lot of times when people think about co-ops, they think about them as these white spaces where, you know, middle class or affluent white folks do like nice hippie things like shop at food co-ops without really identifying that cooperative structures and the cooperative business model can be used, is a tool that anyone can actually use, right? And that is historic and is appropriate for communities all around the world and has been since time immemorial. But I think where we see in particular cooperatives and women coming together is in thinking about employee ownership and the creation of worker co-ops in particular. And you know, I think what we're seeing in particularly traditionally low-waged jobs, thinking about childcare, home health aides, and other kinds of roles where women have traditionally like been a part of those sectors. We're seeing women organizing, particularly undocumented immigrant women, Black women, to take ownership of their labor and to really turn to this model to imagine how they can create their own businesses and pull their resources together and democratize how they produce their labor and contribute their labor to the broader economy while being able to take better care of themselves and the other folks that they need to be responsible for. So we're that as you know, nationally, that's definitely happening. I think at Philadelphia, we're definitely seeing that where 2 of the largest and the oldest worker co-ops that we have are in those sectors, childcare and home health aides.
Susan, are you seeing a lot of women in the public banking organizing movement?
It is primarily women, actually.
Is it?
I've thought a lot about why that is. I think it's that men are all out making money and women are out doing good. That's my theory. They're certainly not sharing in childcare or cooking wonderful dinners for their wives. We're mostly women, not particularly intentionally, but when I look around Oakland, you may or may not know, and I'm sure Jhumpa knows, that Oakland is one of the national centers of nonprofits, 501c3s. And as we look for members for our board, we are turning to all of those nonprofits because they represent our communities. And the leaders they're all women. They're all women. So, and usually women of color. So we're winding up with a board that is very diverse and very interesting and representative. And we certainly plan on making loans, focusing our loan program on those people who are underrepresented in small businesses now. So people of color, women, ex-felons, etc. And you asked before about the biggest difference. I think the biggest difference in banking is that the bottom line our obligation, our legal obligation to our shareholders, it doesn't exist in a public bank. The shareholders are the cities and counties that own the bank. So it's all of us, we're all the shareholders. And more important than making money is our missions. And those will differ by, each bank will have a slightly different mission according to its community, but the mission is much more important than the bottom line.
Now that's a shocking statement for a banker to make. So can you tell us give us some examples of missions that you're aware of?
Well, lending to those small businesses that aren't getting loans from the Wall Street banks right now, or even from community banks. There are plenty of them. We've done surveys, and they're either too small for a bank to bother with, or the owners have a prison record, or there's bad credit or no credit, or they're not citizens. And we hope to be able to reach out to the unserved parts of our communities. We want to stay alive. We do want to make money, but that's
right.
Not the most important reason.
Not the most important thing. Yeah. Interesting. So Emma, your bank was a commercial bank. You were taking in deposits, making loans. What brought you to consider public banking as another potential solution for people?
Well, we were a full service commercial bank. And so if you looked at us, and we were just like every other bank, you couldn't tell we were African American or what, except you knew the history because we had so much publicity getting started. And I think the difference with our bank, the commercial bank that we started, and regular big banks, was that we were over, what would you say? The feds overprotected us. I guess I'll put it that way. In other words, the regulation, we were over-regulated. So anytime we attempted to make loans, and our mission was to provide quality banking services to people of all backgrounds. And anytime we made a loan that appeared to be substandard, even though we knew it wasn't, because we had relationships, direct relationships with people in the communities, and they came along, looked at our portfolio and classified them in such a way, they made us put aside more money in the loan loss reserve than we should have had to put in the loan loss reserve. So that limited our ability to make more loans, and they did it on a regular basis. And our main branch was near the Federal Reserve offices. And when they didn't want to go out on an audit, they came to our offices because we had nice office and sat there and drank coffee and ate donuts and what have you, and overregulated us. That's what they did. They just assumed that we were doing too much for the community. Even though we managed to get what's called CRA status, it still didn't matter. They regulated us to death.
I'm getting a signal here from Mary Beth, who's our timekeeper. She wants us to move along.
I just wanted to add one thing that Jhumpa said. When you talk about the poverty, the gender wage gap, it says that white women make 79 cents of what white men make. Black women only make 62 cents of what white men make on a dollar, and Hispanic women make 54 cents of what white men would. And Asian women make 90 cents. So it appears that Asian women make more than both African American and Hispanic women. So that's, I guess, why Jhumpa said she's not putting that in the equation. So if Black women only make 62 cents on a dollar, that's a big gap. And then Hispanics make 54 cents on a dollar. We don't have any money to invest in anything. So we need public banks to come into business and to help do something about the poverty in our cities.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, it's because I don't think the Asian data is good data because it's not disaggregated. So if you look at Vietnamese women, for instance, it's going to look very different than Chinese women, let's say, right? So it's just, we're a population that gets lumped together that's so diverse and from so many different places, and our immigration stories are so different. I don't like to use Asian data. unless it's disaggregated.
I should tell our listeners that we have that Q&A section, and right now we're kind of addressing the questions we received beforehand. We've talked about a little bit about what the differences are. People are also really curious to know how do you go about starting. And those of you who are in the audience now, you can put your additional questions in the Q&A section, and we'll come to that. At what time are we scheduled to do that? How many more minutes do we have, Mary Beth? Can you tell me?
Half an hour.
Yeah, we have at least till 9:15 before we hit question and answers. So
okay.
We're deep into the conversation right now.
Oh, good. Okay.
Enjoy.
I was worried. So let's talk about how to get started. I mean, if someone is out there and they want to think about starting a cooperative business or a public bank that is accountable to the local community, where do they start? How did you get started? Well, you told us you sat down next to Ellen Brown, Susan, but everybody is not going to be doing that, right? So what are other women in your community doing to find their way into the movement?
Well, they can get in touch with the Public Banking Institute. I'll look on the website. It has the names of people around the country who are activists who've been doing this for a while. Those of us in California started a statewide alliance. We now have 12 different regions that are all at some stage of working on a local bank. And it was that coalition that let us pass the legislation last year. It was a very powerful group of lobbyists. So in California, our website is the California Public Banking Alliance.org. And we very recently have started the National Public Banking Alliance, and it also has a website. And the beginning is talking to people who are deeply engaged in it. We're willing to come and do educational seminars. It's easy now because it's all on Zoom. We don't have to travel. We can take our show on the road very, very easily. And we're happy to do that. We're eager to proselytize and help everyone around the country who's interested get started.
The Public Banking Institute has a lot of wonderful videos and articles and little bits and pieces that if you don't feel like reading one of Ellen Brown's books, there are those smaller pieces that you can start out with that would help. Yeah.
Can I jump in here for a second, Rickey?
Sure.
I think public banking is what I call a public good. And what I say about a public good, what do I mean by public good? Public goods are things like libraries, parks, roads, right? Things that are for the public good. And I think that we need to go back to postal banking, right? And the government should be paying for a public banking system. And I think, until we have that, I'm so thankful for organizations like the California Public Banking Alliance. But something struck me when you were talking about how this can be funded, and we're talking about through fines and fees or traffic tickets or through, different ways that cities balance budgets. Honestly, it's extremely regressive, and it's on the backs of poor people of color because our police are so inherently racially biased, right? Those who get pulled over are mostly Black. So then you're funding an institution that's built on the backs of folks who then are driven into debt, right? So again, while I think that's a temporary solution, I do believe that public banks need to be funded as a public good from the government.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There is a recent bill in Congress just introduced by Bernie Sanders and, I can't remember, calling for postal banking, which is a wonderful idea and which we had in this country. Started in the 30s and went until 1967 when the Republicans and Wall Street killed it. But it was very popular, very successful, and would be really easy to bring back. In fact, we have an article, the California Public Banking Alliance has an article coming out in The Hill any minute now, saying that California will be delighted to be the pilots for postal banking. It's a form of public banking, obviously.
Yes, it would help the post office too, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. Yes,
yeah.
It's a win-win-win.
Right, right. It's another good idea. Jamila, how about people who are just wanting to find out the basics? And, I want to remind people who did sign up that we sent you some resources for further learning. So you can look back at those and take a look at some of the links. Some of the links include connecting to your organization, Jamila, and that wonderful history of cooperative business in Philadelphia, which goes all the way back to Benjamin Franklin and through W.E.B. Du Bois and his ideas. And it's a wonderful, wonderful link to learn more about really how this isn't wacko and weird. It's really old and has been tried and worked well many, many places and ways and times. So
Benjamin Franklin also started a public bank.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
He really did. More on that another time. One of the things I'll start by naming one, the difference between cooperatively owned businesses and traditional businesses is the association of people. So I tend to think of cooperatives as these two primary points. One is the association of people, and the other is the enterprise that they work together to form and operate. And so with the association of people and, cooperatives around the world subscribe to these 7 international principles. And one of those is fundamentally around democratizing how decisions are made, how governance happens within these kinds of businesses, so that there's this one member, one vote kind of requirement, so that everyone, and also economic participation if you're going to join the co-op. So you got to put up some money, you got to put some kind of equity into the business. And once you do, and everybody still just gets one vote, no matter how much money you put into the business. But thinking about the principles and the association of people, I think one of the first things that I say to people is find your people. If you have an idea, I think oftentimes people come up with an idea, they have a need that they want to fill in their community, a gap that they see, just like any entrepreneur. But find your people who you want to organize to own and control a business with. Those are the first steps, I think. And then figuring out how to engage in some study and research so that you're understanding the cooperative business model, but also the industry and sector that you're trying to enter. And we stress a lot about the study, because when you're trying to be co-owners of an enterprise together, you have to have some shared baseline knowledge in order to responsibly make decisions together about that business. And so there has to be some underpinning shared information, whether it's about primarily like finances. A lot of times people come into cooperatives from backgrounds where they haven't been entrepreneurs before, so they don't have experience running a business. So they're learning certain critical basic business skills together. And so that's like one of the places where PACA provides a lot of support to folks. And then once we kind of like work on the association of people building, a lot of the other kind of requirements for starting a co-op look like they would for any other kind of business, creating a business plan, et cetera. And I did want to just like pick up on this idea around like funding too, because I think it goes, when we look at how cooperative enterprises and cooperative economies are structured in other countries, we think about Italy, even our neighbors to the north in Canada, we can see that there's a lot of government support for cooperative enterprise. There is funding channeled and funneled through to ensure that cooperative businesses are mainstreamed into the economy. And we don't really have that here in the United States, with the exception of, what folks, and particularly the agricultural space, organized in the early 20th century, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, around agriculture and electric co-ops that created federal policies and federal funding opportunities that they continue to get. So when we are looking at communities that we're working with, like PACA is working with, low income, poor folks of color, and immigrants, we're not the typical group that our federal government wants to invest in. So there is a need for us to really organize around thinking about not just how do we create these businesses, but how do we also really think about movement building to shift our culture into thinking about normalizing collectivity and normalizing democratic practice beyond the ballot box. And that all of these things are practiced in our cooperative businesses. They're practiced in the thinking that's going into establishing public banks, and that we have to fight for it. So it's not a given that we get to scale these things, because there are so many forces, and this has historically been true, that each time people organize, we're in this moment now where there's socioeconomic and political unrest. And so people are turning to collective and cooperative economic practices to meet their needs, because no one is coming to save us. But you can bet that there will be resistance to that from the establishment. And so in order for us to really move, we have to strengthen our associations of people who are doing this work together.
Oh, really? And make it the new normal, huh? Right now, any collective action, even voting, is considered socialism, isn't it? So people are just kind of stuck in that mindset and forgetting that we do collective action all the time when we get the garbage picked up or we get the roads repaired, or that also is collective action. So including some people in that landscape might be a good thing.
The most famous co-op in the world, Mondragon, has a public bank, which is a co-op.
They have their own bank, that's right. They have their own university too. Yeah, one of our board members, Georgia Kelly, does seminars that go there and brings back knowledge about that. We'll talk with her in another conversation, I hope. Yeah. And maybe she'll have some comments to make during the Q&A session, because I noticed that she was here tonight. So, how to get started, you've given us some great ideas. I also asked you to think about what questions you have as you're just continually learning, right? I mean, Emma, I bet you're still learning, even though you know just about everything there is to know about banking. I'll bet you still are running into some things that you have questions about. So what are some of your questions?
Well, I'm learning every day, constantly learning and trying to keep up with what's going on in the financial field, and particularly in banking. And I think the question I have is, how do we get the public to understand the importance of the public bank as it relates to being able to accumulate, did the same thing I did with the commercial bank, accumulate the capital in the city as revenue, and then reinvest that revenue into things like infrastructure projects, like education and so on, and economic development projects at low interest loans. And so I think somehow we need to do more to educate the broader public on what it is we need to do. and what it is we think the public bank should do and can do. And then once we do that, because this is what I found in creating the bank, I had to step out there, tell them we were going to do this. And before I knew it, since it required the regulators and the politicians to approve or to agree to do it, I had to be so far out there that they then jumped in front of my project and started telling people it was their idea and they were going to do it anyway. So I think my question is, how do we stir up this excitement in the community so that the public bank gets started and all the politicians and the regulators will say it was their idea and we ought to have this bank 5 years ago.
Great question.
That is almost happening.
Is it?
Not with the
That's what you need, Susan. That's what it has to be. When I opened the doors of the bank, you couldn't block the politicians. They were in the front door, and many of them had tried to block me all the way. And then the regulators were there with their suits on, and everything was fantastic. The governor came down. It was a big thing. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter. It took me 5 years to get the bank started.
What I'm finding here is that as we interview candidates for all the various offices coming up, every single one of them says they've always supported public banking since they were infants. In fact, in the womb.
Yes.
Yes. Hilarious, because these are people that, stood up and said, what is this crazy idea? Mm-hmm. And now everyone is for it. So the time feels right.
Good. Mm-hmm.
This is our moment.
That's good. That's great.
I feel like people are so fed up with big banks in this moment, right? Because we've seen how much harm they've caused over and over and over again, from the last recession to this recession, and even if they've been punished. Like, you can have a bank like Wells Fargo or JP Morgan Chase, have a suit against them and have to pay millions and millions of dollars in restitution, and then they just come up with another scheme, right? Like, they don't seem to learn their lesson. I mean, and as long as banks are about profits and not people, right? Which is what private banks are about inherently, corporations, right? They're not going to be for the people. They're not going to be for women in particular, right? Or Black women. So I think we have to switch this narrative on what are banks for. And I agree with you, Susan. We are in a moment right now where folks are just fed up with the predatory lending practices that just keep, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. You call them on this and then they do something else and then they do something else and they just keep preying on people of color.
Mm-hmm. I think, we do have a public banking coalition here in the city of Philadelphia. And one of the things that I think has been really exciting about how that coalition has been moving, and PACA is a part of it, is that it is a coalition. And that it is also a coalition that belongs to other coalitions. So, the idea of connecting our efforts, right? Economic justice doesn't stand on its own. It is connected to gender justice, is connected to education justice, is connected to racial justice. And so our spaces have to integrate, have to intersect. And I think that in a lot of our social justice movement spaces, we don't really talk enough about how economics and economic injustice really hampers so many of our other issues that we're really trying to resolve, and that we can't really resolve them without addressing economic justice too. And so, so organizing with other movements, I think, is part of it. I think in this moment, one of the things that PACA is moving towards in 2021 is really, we're going to do a project in Philadelphia that's going to be documenting our cooperative history in the city, documenting the activity that is happening in the city now around cooperative economic growth, and also doing some deep listening and outreach to people who live here so that they are telling us what they imagine. As Jhumpa said, people are fed up. And when people think about the economy that they want, I bet it's more fair. I bet it's more just. I bet it's probably more democratic. So really trying to listen for the stories and the narratives that people already, they have for themselves, right? So, and this is part of our practice too, is like really trying to lift up the traditions and practices that people already have while introducing these new concepts like public banking and cooperatives, right? So that these aren't new ideas and they're not disconnected from the ways in which people are already practicing economy in their own lives. And so I think the role of our organizations and our coalitions is to kind of bring out and really help to elevate the connection between those desires and that humanness of being connected and doing things fairly and justly with one another to what we're doing and then naming specific models that help us to express that.
I think that's spot on, Jamila. Like this idea of shifting narratives, like when you talk about shared prosperity, right? Like that's actually a narrative that we've tested that really resonates with people, right? Like, or this idea of abundance. Like we live in an abundant time, but we have been told that and forced to live in a scarcity mindset, right? But that's just not true. There's just hoarding happening of our wealth, but there's so much abundance, right? And I think if we're so, you know, I will speak for myself as someone from the left that identifies as a progressive, we're so used to being on the defensive and constantly being reactive to all the crap that's being put down. We don't get a chance to vision and be proactive and talk about like, what is the society we want to create? And then what are the institutions that'll get us there? And when you have that conversation with people, they are talking about community. They are talking about shared prosperity. They are talking about abundance, right? They are talking about understanding how we are all interconnected to one another, that our fates are intertwined. Like people get this. And so then we have to think about if that's the society you want to create, what are the institutions and rules and policies and narratives that are going to get us there? And I think public banking is one of those spaces, cooperatives being another one.
Does anybody think that there aren't as many women in finance as we think there should be? Does anybody think that that has to do with traditional women not being mathematicians, not liking numbers? Is that still?
I mean, that's like totally a narrative that's been fed to us too, right? Women aren't good at math. All we're good at is like, I don't know, caring for babies and doing, you know, these care work, right? Which we totally devalue because we see it as women's work, right? But again, this is like the larger narratives we have about what women can do and what men can do, physical labor versus the smarts, which is completely false, right? But we are subject to that and we fall prey to that and we internalize so many of these narratives that it comes out. That's why like STEM programs focused on women of color in particular are so important because people need to see role models. They need to see people that look like them in those positions to be able to counter the really harmful narratives that are being put out there.
Well, I think it's time for us to entertain some questions from the audience that's been listening in on our conversation here. Carmen, I think you were going to help me with that. Is that right? Have we got the Q&As? Oh, we've got 7 here. I've got a little 7 here. Ah, yeah. Sheila, forgive me if I'm not reading your name correctly, Sheila, but Sheila Noplo Odely wants to know, do public banks require enabling legislation from state governing bodies, or are they already allowed nationwide?
It's different in every state.
Mm-hmm. It is true, though, that banks must be licensed by the state in order to extend credit. Isn't that true?
Emma probably knows better than I do. I would guess that they all need to be.
They all have to be, yes. They have to be licensed in order to do it. Chartered.
Chartered, yes. And so it seems to me that that would probably require some sort of legislation, although it might vary from state to state, but wouldn't it require that sort of enabling power? Are you aware of any state that isn't going that route?
In California, for instance, we really didn't need the law that we passed last year because we have what are called here charter cities and counties that are called home rule cities and counties in other places in the country. We had the power to start public banks on our own. The legislation did clear up some ambiguities in the law and gave us a few bad things. We have to belong to FDIC, which will be a real pain to get their approval, I'm afraid. But that's another regulatory agency, and the legislators were, you know, very nervous about accountability and, oh dear, how will we keep this bank from failing? So they wanted to pile on as much accountability as they could. But the rules and regulations are different in every state. For instance, here in California, we have to basically insure all the deposits 110%. In New Jersey, I believe it's only 5%. That's a huge difference. Huge.
That's that over regulation that Emma was talking about. Yes. Keeping us safe. It's for your own good, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, let's move on to a question from Rashonda Young. She has a question for Miss Emma. She says, as a Black female who is in the process of starting a bank, Rashonda is doing this. Rashonda, I think you're in Iowa, aren't you? How important do you think it is to have a Black female, or at least a female, as a mentor?
Oh, I think it's very important. I think it's a great idea. Unfortunately, I didn't have it. I think I was way ahead of my time or something. But anyway, I think it's a great idea to have a mentor, whether male or female, but especially female, because you're gonna run into some things that you could not imagine would happen because you are a female trying to start the bank. As was said earlier, they don't think we're smart enough. They don't think we know math. I had to prove my skills in mathematics. All of that went into whether or not I could be chairman and CEO of the bank, even though I was the founder. You have to pay. Yeah.
Yeah. Sheila has another statement. She wanted to know how many of you are familiar with the microloan movement begun by Muhammad Yunus in Bangladesh?
No, I'm familiar.
Are you familiar with that?
I'm very familiar. I wrote my thesis on it.
Did you?
Yeah. It was fascinating. It really helps even in minority banks to set aside funds that they can use for micro lending.
She says Susan's comment about being mission driven reminded her of his work in Bangladesh.
Right. It was excellent idea, and a lot of people have copied it. A lot of people have used it ever since it was created.
I have another question here that is, I think Pennsylvania does not have the legal structure to allow public banking. Is there any activity in the Pennsylvania legislature to allow public banking? We've got two people from Philadelphia. Do either of you know what the legal structure says about public banking in Pennsylvania?
Well, I can tell you I've gone to several of the public banking meetings with the legislators, and they've been making us jump through hoops. So it's a lot to go through. They're making us jump through hoops, and even here in Philadelphia, it's taken time. So we spend a lot of time trying to convince the legislators in Harrisburg as well as here in Philadelphia that it's the right thing to do.
Did you jump through hoops there in Oakland, Susan?
We jumped through hoops to get the state bill passed last year. As I said, we had to swallow some poison pills, including needing to belong to the FDIC, which will be difficult. There were a couple others that we had to do to get it passed, but there came a point where it was more important to get it passed than to worry about the obstacles. We'll deal with the obstacles when we come to them. We've been successful so far, and We are totally determined and committed, and it's the right thing to do, and it will happen.
It will happen, yes.
I have an idea for Susan on the FDIC piece. I ran into the same thing with FDIC, and they didn't want to give us our FDIC signs or anything, even though everything had been perfect and sent to them in New York. And so what I told them at the time was that they didn't have to do it. I have 3,000 shareholders. We're all going to get on the buses and the trains, and we're all going to come up to the FDIC offices and get our signs. We got it in the mail that Saturday.
Love it.
Yes.
So, you know, we women come up with great ideas on how to handle things. I mean, we always have to. So sometimes we have to reach into our trick bag to make it happen.
Yep.
Speaking of trick bags, some of you may discover that you're, when you add a question, you come up as Carmen Rios, who's on our board and one of our organizers. You can change your name, but you may not know how to do that. But anyway, the question from Pennsylvania came from Louise Lisi, who must be there in Pennsylvania, and that's why she's curious. So Louise, you know Emma now, so you know who to get in touch with. Here's another question from Rashonda, who's trying to start a community bank. She says, how did you bring in a diverse community of support for your bank? Oftentimes when a business is started by Blacks, it's looked at as a Black business that only serves the Black community.
Did you talk to me?
Well, I think you probably have an answer, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I do. Well, I think I was able to bring in a diverse group of investors because I had been working with diverse groups all along. It was, who was it, Jamala or Jhumpa that said it was a group of us that had been different organizations. I had been in a lot of different organizations. And so I had the experience with them already. So when I came up with the idea and my dream of getting this bank started, I presented it to the organizations that I was a part of. And all of them said that they would be a part of it. And they were.
Great. Well, here's a question from Marguerite Edelman, who's in Vermont here, I believe. She says, what about a women's bank? I do believe those were in vogue a while ago, and they've sort of disappeared off the map too. And if a bank is chartered in one state, may out-of-staters join? Well, a public bank is not it's owned by the government, or the city or the state government that has capitalized it, right? So another state, I suppose you could create public banks that were regional banks, but nobody is attempting that at this point. It would be a bit more complicated, I imagine. They'd have to be a federal bank rather than a state bank. Wow, we have a lot of work ahead of us, people. Complicated.
Think about that. First of all, we are doing regional banks in California, not across state lines, but California is a huge state, and there are parts of it that are not very heavily populated, and so they're getting together, and there will probably be a Central Coast County public bank and a North Coast County public bank with 5 or 6 counties all working together, which will increase the deposits and the capital and make it viable. The other thing is that banks are chartered either by the state that they're in or federally. So a bank could be chartered federally. And then finally, it's important to know that most of us are using the model of the Bank of North Dakota, which has been around for 100 years and is very successful. And they are not a retail bank. They don't have tellers or ATMs. They have very little, really not much brick and mortar at all. They're a banker's bank. So they partner with community banks and credit unions and back up community banks and credit unions. So they strengthen the local economy through those local banks and don't compete with them.
Right, they've got more banks per capita than any other state in the union.
5 times per capita, more community banks. Yes,
yeah.
It's a very strong part of the economy.
Start winding down, Rickey.
Okay, one more question. What are the differences between a public bank and a credit union?
Credit union is still private. Its goal is to make a profit for its shareholders, who are all of its depositors, and a public bank is public, owned by all of us. I want to go back to something that you said a long time ago, Rickey, about, I don't remember your words, but I'm going to call it joy. And I think that's an important piece of all of this, not to forget. And the image that sticks with me is the image from Occupy Wall Street of the ballerina on the Wall Street Bull, which I think it just encapsulates what we're trying to do. This whole making money democratic and responsive to communities has an uplifting, joyous feeling to it that regular Wall Street banking, God knows, does not. So it's the contrast between this joyous purpose and the boring banking money piece that is the Wall Street Bull. And I like that tension, and we all have to acknowledge that tension and use it, revel in it.
Yeah.
I don't want to forget the joyous piece.
Oh, that's a wonderful, wonderful piece of advice. I'm afraid we're running out of time. We need to begin to wrap up a little bit. I want to just share, if Elaine can help me, share that public banking map so people could see how much is going on. And we're going to take a look at slides 7 through 11 here real quickly. Are you there, Elaine?
Rickey, I'm so sorry, but I need to bounce. My child is singing to me that he's very hungry. So I told him that we'd end until 6:30. So it was a pleasure. Thank you so much. It
certainly was. Thanks so much, Jhumpa. Bye now.
Okay, bye.
Thanks so much. Elaine, have you got that? She started the screen sharing. Well, what I want to say is that we're hoping to learn from all of you about what's happening in your area with public banking or cooperative ownership. You can add it into the chat, or you can share in other ways. Okay, we're going to go through the whole show, I guess. Okay, let's go down to the map. There are those resources we talked about. Here it is. You can see, if you roll up a little bit, you can see that Public Banking Institute is in the an Economy of Our Own Alliance. And then if you roll it back down, Elaine, you can see how many things are going on all over the place. Lots of stuff going on. And I'll bet the same thing is true for cooperative businesses too. Now let's just take a look at what is next, the road ahead. Hold on just a second. We wonder what you'd like to see in a conversation or a learning and sharing in a Zoom of our own in the coming year. We're looking for your ideas. And we wonder what an economy of our own would look like for you. How would it be different for you? Write us and share with us, and fill out an evaluation that we're going to be sending your way very soon. We want you to think about that joy piece. That joy is really important. Here's the next conversation that we plan to have in the near future. This is on October 27th. We're really excited about this. It's The Invisible Woman, the work that women do, which is mostly underpaid, always undervalued, and frequently invisible. It won't change until we change the way we value women's contributions, paid and unpaid. So we've got a remarkable panel. Rianne Eisler, whom many of you know, she's a rock star. Hold on here a minute. She's an author of some great books and has given a speech at Bretton Woods about GDP, the gross domestic product, which is connected to all of this, believe it or not. And we're going to have Cara Jabola Carolis join us from the Hawaii Commission on Women. She just put together a remarkable feminist economic plan for post-COVID recovery that we'll be talking about. We've got Patty Machek, who is an artist and has these wonderful invoices for building the patriarchy, and Martha Collins, who is going to give us the point of view of what's happening in Milwaukee, where so much is happening right now. The next one is a thank you for our wonderful panel. We hope you're going to stay in touch with us at our webpage. You can subscribe to our newsletter. Your ideas can be sent to us. If you have the means, you can donate to support this Women's Alliance to make women more visible. Next one down, Elaine, thank you. Shared Economies. I want to just thank these 4 panelists who have been so wonderful. And I want you to know that any donation you give tonight is going to help build our alliance, but also will be donated to the Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance and the Insight Center, because when women of color matter, all women matter, right? So with that, I think we'll just say good night. Thanks so much for joining us. I've had a wonderful time. I hope you have too. Thanks for reminding us of how important that joy is. And keep on having it, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.